That, my friends, is my Bible. Well, my Bible when it comes to all things Dracula. If you love the character and if you love the story, you've got to get this book because it tells you almost everything you need to know about not just the character but also the time it was written, about Bram Stoker himself. Everything to do with Dracula comes in this book. And I most highly recommend you picking it up because you will not be disappointed. I love it so much! Which brings us to Dracula Untold. So, what to say about it? I remember seeing the initial theatrical trailer, and truth be told, I was not very blown away. It didn't necessarily appeal to what makes me say, hey, I want to see this. It didn't look awful, to me anyway, but my initial reaction was just like, that sort of thing. But as the time drew nearer, and the more I found out about the production through news articles and testimony from the actors and the creative crew involved, I started to get a little more hopeful, even though it was completely cautionary. So going into this movie, I was not expecting, a blockbusting spectacle, because let's face it, if you see a trailer like Dracula Untold, you can sort of get a feeling about what the film is going to be. I mean, yes, it is unfair to judge a film before you see it, but instinct tends to sort of clue you in for what you're going in for. So I was under absolutely no illusion going into this movie. So let me give you a general rundown about what happens. So Luke Evans plays Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad Tepes, the Wallachian prince. And let it be known that this film is not meant to be historical, okay? It's not meant to be factual in any way, shape or form. It does have some references necessary to the time, just to sort of place you into the era. But if anything, this film is a superhero origin, and I'll explain to you why a little bit later. So Vlad is living the good life until he is forced by the Turkish Ottoman soldier Mehmet, played by Dominic Cooper with a very nice spray tan, to send about 1,000 Transylvanian boys for the Turkish army because the Sultan demands it. And one of these boys just happens to be Vlad's son. Vlad doesn't like this, so he decides to refuse the Ottoman emperor and goes into the mountains where he finds Caligula. Caligula, the vampire. The Roman emperor, degenerate, psychopathic, arguably, Caligula, who was played by Charles Dance. And let me tell you, Charles Dance is one of the best parts in this movie, but I digress, I'm sorry. So, Vlad strikes a Faustian deal with Caligula. If he's able to defeat the Ottomans within 3 days and resist the thirst for blood, the curse will be lifted. Because he goes to Caligula in order to get the strength of 1,000 men and just be able to strike terror into the hearts of his enemies. So that comes with a cost, as all deals tend to do. So, of course, if you know the character of Dracula and what he would become, well, what needs to be said? So, yeah, as I said, Dracula Untold initially didn't have much of an impression on me when I saw the trailer. I like Luke Evans, I like Charles Dance, I love the character, so you'd think that I would have been a little more excited when I first saw the trailer. But maybe I'm just old, but I never really got into the groove of it until quite later on, as I said. So when I sat down, I wasn't expecting anything, but one thing I was definitely not expecting was brilliance. And I'm thankful I went in there without any sort of high-arching expectations, because I think in comparison to other people who have seen it so far, I've been rather lenient with it, and I'll tell you why. Although Dracula Untold doesn't really offer any sort of highly creative venture, it tries. It makes a very valiant effort to sort of establish the character of Vlad in such a way that it builds him up over time. He's given motivation, and he's given a reason to seek out this terrible deal with this terrible creature of Caligula. Evans is good. I've never hated him in a movie. Now, the movies he has starred in may not necessarily appeal to me, but in terms of being an actor, you can do a lot worse with him. So it was good to see him tackle this role and give it a sense of humanity among all the madness. Sarah Gadon plays his loyal and loving wife, Marina. And Gadon is a Canadian actress, but she pulls off a flawless British accent. When I got home last night and read up on her and the rest of the film, I was surprised to see that. Well, then again, I may not necessarily be surprised, but it was a very sort of a nice thing to know about her, that she was able to not just to equip herself in terms of being an actress, but was able to apply like some of her own skill into the character to give the character of Marina more life. Because the way I think about it, Marina was Vlad's anchor. She was his moral compass, and her interactions with Evans helped sort of boost the gravitas of the film and make it a little bit more than just like your typical, dark magic vampire sort of fest. Dominic Cooper sports a very darling spray tan and a kooky accent, but I was willing to overlook that because, again, I wasn't expecting anything particularly brilliant. He made for a worthy, if eventually not as memorable, foe for Vlad. Their fight towards the end of the movie wasn't too bad because it manages to incorporate Dracula's weaknesses. And it was interesting to see him try and succeed in this battle, which could have easily been lost by him. So yeah, Dominic Cooper as Mehmet wasn't too bad. Charles Dance was a delight. It's only a very small role, but as with any sort of Charles Dance role, he is able to just, kill it. And literally, in the case of Caligula, one of the best lines in the movie comes from him in the form of a threat. He says something along the lines of, I will slice you open from groin to throat and feed you your intestines. That's how babies are made, people. Love it. In terms of the overall look of the film, it's very handsome. And it's handsome and it's functional. It isn't afraid to use colour, and it has a very sort of lushly shot cinematography. And you've got to give it up to the cinematographer for taking the time and the care to establish this world that these characters live in. But that sort of brings me to like the faults of the movie, and there are quite a few. Generally speaking, I think Dracula Untold for me is safe. It's not awful at all. It's better than Van Helsing. It's better than I, Frankenstein, and it's by default better than Twilight. So if you're expecting something along those lines, don't worry. You most likely will not get those burns searing into your face again. But I felt this film could have pushed for more of a higher rating. I personally don't have anything against PG-13 films. I'm not one of those people who demand all of my horrors need to be violent and gory and that sort of thing. But here's the thing. The Conjuring that came out in 2013 was rated R, or MA here in Australia. Not because of any sort of violence, but because of the fact it was able to build up an atmosphere. It was genuinely frightening because of the fact that it's telling a ghost story. But with Dracula Untold, I felt there needed to be some sort of violence in there, some sort of cruelty, because this film takes place during a war. Now, I understand if the director Gary Shaw, out of good taste, didn't want to show people being impaled, because impaling is a very terrible business, very, very icky. I would not recommend it. Trust me. But I felt when Vlad becomes more and more in tune with his powers, it would have behooved the film to sort of show how potent he was. how cruel and vindictive he could be towards the Turks. There are some really nice visuals to show his power, but there still needs to be some sort of punch to it. There needs to be some sort of staying power with the fight scenes. In terms of the battle scenes, they're well choreographed in terms of the swordplay, but I still felt that it's one thing to show men fighting. It's another thing to show a monster coming into the fray and ruining everybody in the battlefield. And Dracula Untold seems afraid to do that. And I just have to think why. This is being released around Halloween, okay? This isn't January. People go to the movies in October to see scary films. It just makes sense. So I don't see why people are so afraid to, like, not sort of push the envelope just a little bit more. Now, in terms of overall, as I said, this film is safe for me. I give it about a 3 out of 5. If I was a more discriminating viewer, it'd be like 2.5 out of 5. But if they are going to go forward and make a sequel to this movie, man, they need to step up their game. Maybe they got a bit of a free pass for this one because it shows mainly Vlad as a mortal man coping with this terror that's burgeoning inside of him. But when they're making this sequel and finally showing him as a full vampire with all of his experience and everything, they gotta make sure that they sell it. And it just wouldn't do if it was on the same level as this movie. Stakes need to be raised, stakes. But also, they just need to not be afraid. Don't be afraid, guys. This is why we go and see vampire films. This is why we go and see horror films. This is what we want. Don't be afraid about the parent groups and that sort of thing. You know, make a movie as well as you can, and don't be afraid to, you know, just push it that little bit more. That's all we want. So, in conclusion, I did not mind Dracula Untold, but I would recommend that you go and see the movie, you know, during like a cheap day, because to me it's not worth the full price of admission, but it's not a bad watch. If you are prepared to go in and just like try and accept as much as you possibly can from the narrative, it's not a painful ordeal. So, Dracula Untold, being told, for you, Nathan, is 3 out of 5.